Good morning, Barcelona. Uh, I'm coming to you pre-recorded via video, via Skype. My name is Sonam Adnolf. This is Selen Turkay, and we're coming to you from Columbia Teachers College. So we're here to talk to you about what players think they learn in games. Now, when we talk about games, most of us know from our own experiences that games can be good for learning. During the last decade or so, with the advancement of hardware and internet technologies, digital games have become popular for anybody, but especially for school-aged children. There's a growing body of evidence supporting that digital games have educational value. This has led to excitement about the possible uses of such games for teaching and for learning of various school subjects. The literature around games and learning has been strengthened with various types of studies and theoretical pieces across different game genres and different types of learning. Various groups and institutions like Games for Learning Society, Games for Change, and the Games for Learning Institute, and the Future Lab in the UK have been both developing learning games and putting together building blocks of games and learning literature. We've identified 5 main research branches in games and learning literature. First, developing and testing the effectiveness of educational or serious games in formal educational settings. Second, using commercial, off-the-shelf games in formal educational settings. Third, studying games, both theory-based and custom-built, and commercial off-the-shelf, as part of informal learning. Fourth, creating pedagogical models that we can draw from video games. And fifth, having students design and develop games for learning in formal educational settings. While we were doing a literature review, though, we could not find any study which asked a large number of gamers about their experiences of learning with games. So, in this exploratory study, we are interested in incidental learning with digital games in the context of informal learning settings. In particular, we're going to take a close look at players' perception of learning with digital games. For example, what people think they learn while they play games in their leisure time. We think that more evidence is needed in the area of games as informal learning tools. Therefore, our research questions were: do players think they learn when they play games? If yes, what do they learn? Do players' age and gender affect their attitudes towards games for learning? Now, learning from our past experiences of having way too much data to analyze, we decided to ask just a few questions in this survey. A mixed method survey was used to collect data from online forums through snowball sampling. These forums were public and private gaming forums. A total of 769 players filled out the survey, and the survey collected demographic data as well as participants' weekly gaming hours and their favorite game genres. We asked participants 3 questions regarding games and learning. First, have you learned anything new in games? Second, can you tell us one of the things that you've learned recently? Third, are games good for learning? Why or why not? Now, as you can see from the chart, we had a pretty good age range. Unfortunately, most of the players, around 60%, were MMORPG players, so we didn't run a comparison between games. When asked, have you learned anything new in games, there was 73.5% said yes, 26.5% said no. There was no statistically significant gender difference. There was a statistically significant difference between different age groups. Tukey's post hoc test showed that significantly more players who were 18 and below reported that they had learned various things from games compared to players between 19 and 30. When we asked participants whether they think games are good for learning, 91% reported that either games are definitely good for learning or possibly good for learning. Only 9% said that they weren't. The rest of them feared that when games become educational, they would aim to teach players the content not in a fun way. This goes against the perception that players will avoid educational games because they're educational. The more obvious reason for players to avoid many educational games is that they're not fun. Interestingly, players think that the more difficult games are, the better they are for learning because they require thinking and reflection. We found a significant correlation between how much participants think games are definitely good for learning and who reported that they had learned things from games. There was no statistical gender difference in this result. So, how do players learn in games? Well, they may learn from the game's mechanics. This seems quite obvious, as players need to know about game mechanics to play the game. While players learn semiotic domains of games, they can also learn knowledge such as physics laws and develop skills such as mathematical thinking and faster reflexes. For example, in this screenshot of Sid Meier's Pirates, a player is given a wind meter, which could teach about force vectors. Firing cannons from the side of the ship could teach about perpendicular lines. What different types of ships and nationalities were present also communicates to the player in the game. Players also could learn from narrative. While it's not present in all games, narrative is a critical element in many modern video games. While the narrative creates an immersive and engaging environment, it can also facilitate learning. Participants reported learning new vocabulary and improved reading skills from written dialogue or mission text. They learned about historical events from the setting of the game and details in the story. Assassin's Creed II, which takes place in Renaissance Italy, was given as an example by participants who reported learning from the story of the game. Now we come to the social aspects. Players learn from each other. For example, learning about the game through apprenticeship. 31% of the participants reported learning that mainly originates from the social aspects of games. As we expected, players with their favorite games as MMORPGs mentioned social learning significantly more than other players. Participants reported a wide range of skills and knowledge that they learned from games. For example, leadership, communication, teamwork skills, politics and cultures, internet resources for games, and computer hardware were among these. Some players even reported getting recipes for certain dishes, or even getting violin lessons over voice chat. This supports Steinculler and Duncan's finding, where participants reported that gaming forums were a main place where they constructed their knowledge about game mechanics. The last category of learning is tangential learning. This is when players learn by becoming interested in an in-game topic and expand their knowledge on this topic by studying outside resources without obligatory reinforcement. Similar to self-directed learning, players reported educating themselves when introduced to topics in a context that they were already engaged in. For example, players may become interested in Greek mythology after playing God of War, or they may learn how to create machinima when they're inspired by in-game videos. So, now, what do players learn? We asked them, can you tell us one of the things you learned recently? Out of 699 participants who said games are good for learning and that they learned from games, 478 gave examples on what they learned in games. Analysis of these examples revealed how and what players learned from games. Data revealed three major categories of skills learned in games. Social skills like teamwork and negotiation, motor and spatial skills such as getting better at reflexes or hand-eye coordination, cognitive skills such as problem solving, estimation, languages, and strategy development. Players also reported getting various personal traits such as patience, trusting others, and persistence. Players learn both declarative, for example, historical facts, and procedural knowledge, like how to negotiate, when they play games or in the affinity space of games. Among the knowledge participants reported, 37% reported that they had learned about mathematics or statistics, 3% said they learned about science, 12% said they had improved their vocabulary and foreign language skills, and 9% said they had learned of history. 32% reported learning about the game itself, such as strategies or game plot. The rest included a variety of areas such as geography and daily life related things like politics and cultural values. Here's a few examples of games that we think may promote incidental learning. In the upper left corner, you've got the board game Puerto Rico. Upper right, you have Portal by Valve. Then you come down with Okami, and then Napoleon from the Total War series. Each of these has different aspects which might lend itself to incidental learning. The Total War series really took advantage of this kind of learning. Every loading screen featured famous and insightful quotations from the era of the game, either spoken or written by famous and not-so-famous people throughout history. They improved immersion, as well as adding a mature element to a game which is steeped in historical fact that Hollywood films so frequently avoid. Now, when we talk about games and transfer of learning from games, we have to make a clear distinction of what kind of learning we're talking about. Psychologists have long recognized two kinds of learning. One that is relatively shallow, operates through repeated association of stimuli and outcomes, and is domain-specific. And another that's deeper, involves the acquisition of concepts and meaning, and transfers across domains. Transfer of learning is not a question only for games and learning, but for any concept and any type of learning in general. Learning transfer literature is full of examples and where studies and experiments have failed to facilitate transfer responses in subjects, even when in many cases the odds seem to be very much stacked in its favor. Studies with expert players have provided encouraging results with regard to the transfer power of games. One interesting point came up again and again, and that was that the complexity of a game encouraged learning. Also, declarative knowledge almost always transfers. Procedural knowledge may or may not transfer. So, we often hear educators or game designers say, "Don't tell students this is an educational game. They won't play it." This exploratory study has shown evidence to the contrary. We believe that as long as games are engaging and fun, students will play them, and if the opportunity arises, they will use the knowledge and skills they learn from games. The following quote from a school-age participant is representative. Quote, "Games could potentially be good for learning if you made the game fun, since the interactivity of a game, along with how fun it is, can really make a player interested. This may mean that we don't need stealth learning in games, we need good design. As video games in education are gaining more attention, it becomes critical to understand how games can impact students learning out of school and help them develop lifelong learning skills. Our results provide promising evidence that players not only learn in games, but they also extend their knowledge outside of the game when they get interested in an in-game topic. Games in general teach goal setting, perseverance, resource management, and they encourage persistence. If educational game designers aim for transfer from games, they need to design games that are challenging and that encourage post-game reflection and tangential learning. If people are motivated to do something, it is likely that they will be willing to spend time on it and that they may learn from it. That is why people spend hours on hobbies like playing games, and game designers are responsible for what kind of learning can be gained from games. We believe that more games should be designed with the goal of promoting incidental and tangential learning. G identified 5 conditions for an experience in a game that needs to be useful, that in the game that needs to be useful for learning. It needs specific goals, immediate feedback, application of previous experience, learning from peers and experts, and interpretation. We want to add a few conditions which came up in our study. Add complexity and challenge. Good level design helps with that. Make players curious or surprise them. Make the learning part of the game mechanics, and expose players to new themes and concepts. These can make a useful checklist when designing a game experience that will be part of a player's learning ecology. So, then we have some recommendations here for educators and for researchers as well. For educators, choose wisely, encourage long-term exposure to the games that you're trying to get people to learn from, and encourage discussion and reflection, and use games as out of class work as well. For researchers, specify your goals. Be clear about what audience you're both researching and what audience you actually want to gain information about. Be specific about what games you've done research on, and don't overgeneralize. And then carefully design transfer studies to help further the field. I think I'm going to end with a remarkably coherent and cogent quote from a young gamer. Quote, "Video games can always carry tidbits of information that help expand my knowledge, particularly when it comes to language. I learned many words and the contexts of those words through video games. As well, certain video games can challenge you to think outside of the box, expanding upon your problem-solving skills. Video games also work as a good stress reliever, which is important. The brain can only intake so much knowledge at once that it's important for it to be given a rest. There's nothing like coming home from school and popping a disc into my console." This was a male between the ages of 10 and 18. Pretty good. Anyway, thank you for attending our presentation. Once again, we are here via recording, but if you have any questions or comments, please email one of the 2 emails listed above us. Thank you, and have a great conference.